Do you like Cobra? Drop a comment if you like Cobra. Drop a comment if you even know what Cobra is. Because if you don't know what Cobra is, or if you don't like it, then that means it's probably not giving you adequate health insurance. And so, who cares? We should expand Medicare and work to open the doors of Medicare, because here's the issue with Medicaid. Now, here's some good things with Medicaid. Medicaid, a lot of folks would say that Medicaid can be more efficient and more cost efficient in delivering healthcare. And I think it's worth taking a look at why that is. And I think it's worth taking a look at some of those systems. Look at all these people. Everyone says no one likes Cobra. No one likes Cobra. We should not defend it. I don't think that Democrats should make their brand and say, hey, you know what's great? Cobra. No, it's not. No, it's not great. Cobra shouldn't even exist. It should not even exist. We should have systems that are able to guarantee people health care without making them go broke. And apparently in America, that makes you the most radical, far left, angry person in the world for thinking that people should be guaranteed health care without going broke. But anyways, I digress. Cobra's ridiculously expensive. I just don't even know how a person can offer Cobra and just stand there with a serious face and say Cobra is a solution for working families. It's crazy. If you can afford Cobra, then your life's pretty good, actually. If you can afford it, it's so expensive. And if you can barely afford Cobra right now, even if you're able to swing Cobra, it leaves you broke at the end of the day too. And how else are you gonna pay for childcare, rent, everything else? It's wild. So, look, there are folks popping in here right here in the comments saying Cobra cost me almost as much as my rent. I mean, it's not just Cobra. When we think about some of the costs that make people, that almost rival people's rent, it's it's really criminal. It's amoral. There are people I know whose student loan payment is almost as high as their rent. Raise your hand if your student loan payment is almost as high as your rent. Raise your hand if your health insurance is almost as high as your rent. Raise your hand if you have medical payments, insurance or medical debt of any kind that's almost as much as your rent. And it's just, I cannot tell you how often, I know people for whom this is the situation, and B, my friends are in this situation. C, I've been in situations that are similar to that. It's not wrong. I mean, it's wrong. It is wrong, and it's not right. And so we really need to make sure that we're taking care of people right now. It's a pandemic. This is about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need to cover the basics before you can get to making sure that we're having a super well-functioning, high-functioning society. And that means food, that means rent, that means, it means food, it means shelter, it means basic health. And right now, all of those things are in a precarious position for a lot of people, which is why the Senate needs to get it together, and they need to extend the pandemic unemployment assistance. They need to send out another stimulus check, and we need to include automatic stabilizers. But they're trying to play games because they think that if you can stick your fingers in your ears, that it's going to somehow change the reality. It's not. The reality is that over 30 million Americans are unemployed. And the reality is that we have not seen this level of unemployment shock in the United States of America since the Great Depression. And the reality is that it is going to take heroic federal policy not seen in at least 100 years to make sure that people are okay and that we can get out of this mess. And my opinion on this is that if any policy that's being presented looks anything remotely similar to anything that we've done before, we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough. This is not like 2008. This is not like the Great Recession, where unemployment started to kind of, first of all, we've well blown past those numbers. But second of all, where unemployment started to just like kind of creep up, this is completely in a different universe. We're talking about in 2 months, 30 million people becoming unemployed. And I don't think that a lot of my colleagues really understand what that means to be a normal person. And they're not acting with any urgency. They're just kind of like whistling and walking by and checking on, their stocks. And that's not the position that we're in as everyday people. So anyways, I'll move on. Checking in here, I cannot believe you all have raised $43,000 for the NYSYLC. You all are incredible. For those who are just tuning in, this is a fund that's going to people, hardworking people in our country that did not get stimulus checks, that are not getting unemployment, but who are feeding us, who are delivering us food, preparing our food, cleaning and sanitizing our workplaces. So many undocumented people are helping us sustain our lives and have helped us sustain our lives, yet and are paying taxes and aren't even getting a dime of relief. And these are the folks that are suffering, in some ways the most. And so, I just want to thank you all for supporting the NYSYLC, because, we're fighting to pass federal policy, but so much of our federal policy leaves people behind. And I'm just so thankful that you all are stepping up for so many of the people that are being left behind right now. So I'm ready to pop in. Let's see if you guys have any other additional questions. Someone said, is your ice cream melting? Yes, my ice cream is absolutely melting. It is now soup. It's my dessert gazpacho at this point. Let's see. Someone is saying, what is happening with the feds in Portland? Let's talk about Portland. What we are seeing, what we've seen in Portland, is just an incredibly scary manifestation of something that so many of us have been warning about for a really, really long time. Now, a year ago, I voted against funding DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, which is the overarching agency responsible for CBP and ICE. Now, what does CBP and ICE have to do with arresting U.S. citizens? That's an excellent question, because what we have done is that we have put in billions and billions and billions of dollars into a poorly regulated agency that is rogue, that has almost zero accountability, that has almost no rules, and by the way, was created in about 2002, 2003-ish. So this isn't an agency that has an established history, and this is an agency that repeatedly breaks the law and is not held accountable for it. And the issue that we have with the Department of Homeland Security is, and these are issues, and you know what's really sad about this is that back in the day, there were Republicans that opposed the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, and they came from a libertarian perspective, because back then, Republicans who claimed to be libertarians actually had integrity. And they said this is an expansion of government power. This infringes upon our civil liberties. We're allowing things in the Patriot Act like warrantless wiretapping. This is not, we have these secret courts with the FISA courts. All of this is wrong. And so there were principled people, even the Republican Party, that says the Department of Homeland Security should not exist. This was a libertarian right position, and it was also a position from some people on the left as well, progressives on the left, for very similar reasons. Because when it comes to the protection of civil liberties, there are actually some pockets of the right and some pockets of the left that used to be able to come together. Now the right wing has just, the Republican Party has kind of become a cult of personality around Donald Trump. And there are very few Republicans that will openly oppose him. And so how does this tie to Portland? The reason this ties to Portland is because, as many people know, several weeks ago, there were protesters that were just getting kind of disappeared by secret police, unmarked officers. And why is this so scary? Well, it's incredibly scary because, first of all, if you are taken into an unmarked van and you don't know what agency is responsible for taking your brother, your mother, your friend, how are you supposed to be able to find them? In the United States, we have habeas corpus, and when you are detained, that means within 24 hours you need to be told why you're being detained, what your charges are, or you need to be let go. And when people are detained for longer than that, and you don't know where this person was taken to, when we have a history of having, these kind of extrajudicial pockets in this country, that's extraordinarily scary for our civil liberties. And when we talk about this concept of American exceptionalism, when people say America's the greatest, America's the best country on earth, when we say those things, the reason why people have historically said that is because of our constitutional liberties. When they say we have freedom. And what does freedom mean? Freedom doesn't mean you have the freedom to walk into Trader Joe's and abuse a worker because you don't want to wear a mask. That's not what freedom means. What freedom means is that you have the freedom of speech. You have the freedom to not be denied due process. That means you have the freedom to do what you can and not be detained by your state or your government unjustly. And people have died and shed blood for those rights and those liberties, not just here in the United States, but everywhere in the world. And so when a person is disappeared into a van by an unmarked officer who will not disclose their name, who will not disclose what agency they work with, and by the way, has no business detaining US citizens, we are in really big trouble. And this is where we start talking about authoritarian regimes and fascism. Because it's one thing for your rights to be written down on a sacred piece of paper like the Constitution. What makes it special here in this country is that we actually enforce those rights and that we protect people's rights. And once we stop enforcing people's constitutional rights and liberties, actual Constitution, like you actually open the Constitution and read it, because the Constitution does not say I should go to Costco and not wear a mask. That's not in the Constitution, okay? But what is in your Constitution is your ability to not be detained by the state, that you are free from illegal search and seizure, and many more. And so what is scary about Portland is that when DHS and last year CBP, a year ago, I was saying that CBP and ICE should not be getting these funds. Congress started cutting multi-billion-dollar checks to ICE and CBP after, by the way, after they separated children from their parents and caged these kids and deported their parents. Even after that, we said, listen, we need to draw a line in the sand. They cannot be getting these blank checks. There needs to be accountability. And by the way, ICE as an agency, as it's structured, should not exist. DHS as an agency, the way it is currently organized, someone tell me why it makes sense, why FEMA and CBP and ICE and the Coast Guard should all be part of the same agency. It doesn't make sense. And in fact, it's incredibly dangerous when it's structured that way. And so what's happening is that billions and billions of dollars have gone to ICE and CBP. And as we're talking about police uprisings in this country, I think it's really important that people understand. Do you know what is now the largest law enforcement organization in the United States of America? It's CBP. It's Customs and Border Patrol is the largest law enforcement agency in the country. And they are not accountable. They don't even have the same accountability as normal police officers. Your average police department has more accountability than CBP does. Think about that, because all of these uprisings that we're having across the country are about the lack of accountability in many police departments. And so think about that, and think about the fact that your average police department has more the few structures of accountability that people are saying aren't enough. That is leagues more accountability than even CBP has. And so now CBP, which is a rogue agency, which has kidnapped children from their parents, when the moment we said we could do that to others, we set the stage for doing that to ourselves. Because that's how just values and principles work. And this administration has been using immigrants as a guinea pig for how much our civil liberties can be violated. And that is why it's so important that we stand up for each other. Because the moment you allow something like that to happen in the United States, you're just allowing it to happen. The moment you allow it to happen to any human being is the moment you open the door for it to happen to someone you love. Which is why I do not believe that this country is about some people that have rights and liberties and other people that do not have rights and liberties, i.e. documented, undocumented citizen, non-citizen. You cannot draw those lines. This is supposed to be, right, the language that is used is the land of the free, not some people who are free, not a land where some people are free. It is the land of the free. So if you are a human being on this land, you should be protected in your rights, in your liberties. And so when you disappear a person into an unmarked van, and you have people in CBP or DHS that feel deputized, they feel that they have the right to violate another human being's human rights and civil liberties, it is completely unacceptable. And so when we want to talk about what's going on in Portland, you are now having Customs and Border Patrol. They're not going after immigrants. They're going after US citizens. That means they're opening the door to going after you, going after me, going after anybody else, because they don't have virtually any of the accountability that they should have. And so while people talk about this idea of abolish ICE and we need to restructure DHS, these are seen as these radical, far left, this, that, and whatever principles. Frankly, we're just talking about these concepts. But what's actually happening is far more radical and far more scary than any debate that's happening in Washington. Because what's actually happening is that people are getting snatched up by unmarked officers into a van. How is that not radical? And when we talk about, politics in Washington, because I want to discuss a little bit about the speech from last week as well, I also think that this is also part of a broader conversation about who gets deemed radical and who does not get deemed radical. Because you look at what the Trump administration is doing, you look at what Mitch McConnell is doing, you look at what a lot of these Republicans are doing, and they are never branded as radical. But isn't kidnapping children and trafficking them across the country and deporting their parents, isn't that radically violent and wrong? Isn't refusing economic protections for 30 million people radical? Isn't that a radical and severe thing to do? Isn't, when you look at, so many of these policies, but because they are wealthy, isn't a $2 trillion tax cut giveaway to the wealthiest people in society, to billionaires and the richest and wealthiest people, isn't that a radical misallocation of resources? It is. But the politicians who are very often wealthy, very often white, and very often male, though often they don't have to check all three of those boxes, but often do, they do radical things all the time, but they are not branded as radicals. Yet, women of color, and people who fight for the working class are always deemed radical. And I find this really interesting because it's really about otherizing people. When you call someone a radical, it's often done in a mainstream, when the mainstream calls people radical, it's often done with the purpose of otherizing. And that's when we start talking about dehumanizing language, right? Because even when I saw in some of the coverage to my speech, like people called me fiery and they called me emotional. And I don't know about y'all, but I didn't feel very fiery delivering that speech. I didn't feel like I was worked up or anything like that. And I do get fiery. Y'all know. But not here, not there. Yet people automatically jumped to this script of fiery, of basically she is asking for it, right? Like she came out here swinging all of these things when it simply wasn't even true. It wasn't even true. And so, when we talk about radical in a political context, in a mainstream political context, I'm not talking about the meaning of the word, because if you actually look at the meaning of the word, I don't mind being called a radical. I don't mind being radical when our problems are so radical. But in the way that word is used and weaponized and selectively applied, it's done in a dehumanizing context. It's done in a way that's saying, these radicals, if you're radical, then you want to destroy or hurt people, and so we can do whatever we want to you. That's the subtext. That's the subtext in the way that it's used. Because, it's so selectively applied, and it's not evenly applied. And this happens all the time. It also happens in a very misogynistic way. When you consume the news, you will almost always see, especially with women, that a lot of news outlets deliberately select the most unattractive, unflattering. They'll take pictures of us kind of mid-sentence or mid-speaking, and they'll make that like the ugliest photo that you can find of a woman possible. When she's trying to make a point, they'll make that the header of a news article. And really it has implications for the point, right? But when it comes to men, I think it's hilarious the lengths that news media goes to find like the most gorgeous photo. Well, gorgeous, I don't know if I'd say gorgeous, but they'll find the most flattering photo ever of a man that's very often either being accused of sexual harassment or assault, or is proposing something very ugly. Like, you see the photos that the press use of someone like Newt Gingrich, and they're always photos from like 1999. Like, they're or like Lindsey Graham. They're like pictures from years ago. Or they are pictures to make them look serious. And these are all kind of to make them look esteemed. And these are all the subtext. This all works in a subconscious level. And I noticed that, a lot of the times it functions in a very subconscious way, but it very often bubbles to the top. When I was running in my primary election, where Wall Street and Goldman Sachs and all these big bank CEOs dump $3 million against me. Oh, and then we wipe the floor with them because it's people, not big money, that should be dictating our democracy. Anyways, that's an aside. What did Goldman Sachs do? What did these Wall Street folks do? What did these, these dark money, big money funded organizations do? They sent out all of these mailers in this community, in my community, of me making these like terrible faces, right? Like they take pictures of me mid-speaking, they up the contrast. This also happens to candidates of color all the time, where they will manipulate your skin tone in Photoshop, which is so ugly and messed up, because you're playing into and you're stoking the fires of colorism, you're stoking the fires of racism, you're stoking the fires of misogyny, of xenophobia, because you know it's going to play into your hands. And but you know what, it happens all the time, and it's something that I think we can start to solve by being conscious of, and you have to call it out. And so whenever you see that, here's my little takeaway for today. Whenever you all see a news organization tweet a story about a female politician, and they use like an ugly photo, a lot of times they even contrast it. This even happened last week in my confrontation with Ted Yoho, where they'll use it, where a lot of organizations use articles where I'm scowling and he's smiling, when he was the assailant, when he was the one who was accosting somebody. So whenever you see that, call it out, and you should ask, why did you use those photos? Why did you use those photos in two different ways? And the more people start calling it out, the more these subconscious things start bubbling to the surface. And that's how people can be held accountable. Because when we talk about these structures, as we know, it's all about these little, it's all of these little decisions that amount to then add up to real policy implications. Because what happens is that you discredit the messenger so that you can discredit the message, right? If you call the person, if someone's standing up and saying, listen, we need rent and mortgage relief right now, if you take the person that's standing up and you make an example of them and you call them radical and you make them look angry, then people say, oh, I don't know if I agree with her, or I don't know if I agree with that. And then what happens? You try to discredit the messenger so that you can discredit the message of guaranteeing healthcare, of raising the minimum wage to a living wage, so you can discredit rent and mortgage relief for everyday people. And then before you know it, you end up, we end up with just politics and politicians that aren't fighting for us. And so I just wanted to send that out there. I'll do one more question for you all. Feel free to pop the question here into the chat. And holy smokes, $57,000 for NYSYLC. You all are amazing. Again, there's never any pressure or anything to donate, but the fact that you all have, this is incredible. We are on the precipice right now. The unemployment pandemic, the pandemic unemployment assistance is expiring this week. We have to put the pressure on Republicans to expand it. And please do not take, what they're trying to do right now is that they're trying to reduce it. So they know that there's going to be huge political consequences if they don't renew it at all. But now what they're trying to do is say, what if we send, we're in the haggling phase, right? And so what they're trying to do is eliminate the expansion, and they're trying to give people less. We need to put pressure on Republicans right now to tell them to expand the $600 and to extend the $600 pandemic unemployment assistance because they are trying to chop it. They're trying to get away with whatever they can get away with. If they can get away with getting rid of it entirely, they're going to do it. If they can get away with cutting it in half to make it $300, they're going to do it. So please don't let them do it. Light up the phones, light them up on Twitter, light them up everywhere, because we have to make sure that they extend unemployment insurance, unemployment assistance for everybody, especially, you know, because some of y'all are in states that have horrible unemployment insurance policies. You know, I know we have really big issues in New York, but relatively, New York's unemployment assistance is actually way higher than a lot of other states in the country. We're probably in like the top 3 or 4, which is sad that we're in the top 3 or 4 because we should be doing so much more. But there's states in Florida, there are other states that give like $200-300 a week that people can't live on. And so this $600 it makes, you know, it's the difference between people being able to feed themselves and not feed themselves. So do I think we're going to get another stimulus check? I think that right now, and again, all of this negotiation is up in the air right now. So they're arguing about this.